How's it going, guys? We're just going to jump right into it this time. What is good? Basically, a while back now, a month ago, there was a huge argument over what makes a player good, who would be considered in the top 10, this sort of thing. And there's a few proposed methods of deciding. Basically, I think the best measurement would be a panel of professionals. Usually I wouldn't agree with this method, but because of the nature of Hearthstone and the ability to talk to another player and just kind of sense how good they are, I think that's the best way to determine who is good. That being said, I think that there's a huge misconception with whether or not players who used to be good can still be considered good or what have you. A prime example being Firebat. Firebat's obviously a good player. Would I put him in my top 10? No. Would Firebat put himself in his top 10? I don't even think so. Lately, Firebat... Interrupt for a second. Thanks for the host, Frank in a Box. Lately, Firebat hasn't made the two last prelims. Does he have the capabilities of playing well? Yes, of course, but he's been streaming. Does that affect his play negatively? Probably. So it's tough to say, like, how good is Firebat, and even if he has the potential to be better, is he, would he be considered good still just because he has that potential? And I think this has become more important as the rest of the season moves on. We see more prelims where we see more unknown players or what have you doing well. Obviously, just because you top 8 a prelim or just because you do well in championships doesn't mean you're necessarily a good player, but some players who have, repeatedly done well, like Nostum or what have you, obviously have some semblance of skill past maybe like pros knowledge, for instance. So I want to cover what I think would be the top 10 players, and then that might give you a better understanding of where I think we can determine skill. So let's pull this over here. This is kind of a meme. We're going to go off of the list of the Ghosty Gamers list. Not like their top 10, but we're going to pick our own top 10 off their list of players. Let's see here. Alright. We'll be back to this in a second. Team? I had this set up, but I actually exited out of it before I started the stream. Ooh, already making mistakes. Wonder why it's not working. Well, regardless, I'll go off of myself. So, I think that there are 3 divisions within the top 10, personally. I think that if you look at players like Life Coach Oskaka and Stan Sifka, I'd put them in the highest level. Obviously, like I talked about before, is Life Coach so good? He hasn't made prelims twice. Yeah, he doesn't want to make prelims twice. He'll tell you that. Obviously, he's still good at the game. He had a huge influence on the EU prelims because of the Shaman deck and stuff. Now, the level under that becomes extremely less clear, which is that the middle 5 players. And since we have more events than when I originally wrote my top 10 list a month ago, there's some players I think have shown that they're fit in this next grouping of players. To start out the next grouping, I'd put JJ, for instance. Excuse me. Pavel, he'd be a new addition to my list. His plays really impressed me. And then, of course, Kalento, these types of people would also go on the list. And then there'd be another break after those people which I think is those 3 I named. I don't know why I'm saying it like that. And I think that the very end of the list would be like Tice, people that are consistent, but don't necessarily have some of the professional or like other pro player backings that the top players on the list do. And that's what I want to come back to with the like what is being good at the game and how you determine how someone's good at the game. Is it just results? Obviously, it's one of the only ways that we have that we can determine who's good at the game. But if you talk to other pros, then they'll tell you like these people are just probably the best. Like they'll probably agree. Update title, this is episode 1. It's a good call, Blastoise. Thank you for that. And we'll just edit this part on the YouTube video. Mistake. Anyways, this topic's less interesting, but I wanted to intro with it because I had the list last time. I was going to post it in the last episode I was going to do that got canceled. So I want to move on to something that helps skew how we determine someone's good and takes away from results, which is beneficial bitching. Okay, at first you might be like, beneficial bitching, what does that mean? Well, basically it's bitching or complaining that takes away from the integrity or the validity of the structure of the Hearthstone Tour, the ladder, or like various tournaments that people play in. So, take for instance, as an example, someone like RANT. If he complains about how the game's all RNG and stuff, and the public sees that, then it's beneficial to him because it takes away from the integrity of what he isn't accomplishing, which allows him to exist in a space where he's validified in not accomplishing those things. Now, RANT's running a company, all that other good stuff, so it's not necessarily a bad thing that he isn't at the top of his game right now. That being said, there's also other ways that beneficial bitching is accomplished. When someone loses in a tournament and they say, oh, this tournament was double limb, or this tournament was Conquest, like what a fucking joke, Ellie giggle, etc., etc. You never see people complain when they win, like very rarely. So when you say like, oh, I'm trying to be constructive, I find it like hard to believe. No doubt there are constructive conversations to be had about this topic, and we're going to move on to that after this. But in general, if you're like, oh, what a joke, this tournament was horrible, double limb Swiss, no determinant of skill whatsoever, it benefits them to complain about the tournament because then the fact that they're knocked out becomes less, I don't know, important or less of a negative to their play skill. But in reality, since we're all Hearthstone players, we all know that you're not going to win every tournament, you're not going to win every game. Even if you play the best, even if you bring the best decks, sometimes you just don't get lucky. So why is it such a big deal to justify getting knocked out of a tournament by attacking the tournament integrity? It makes no sense whatsoever. Like, I don't understand why people do it. Some cases, maybe the tournament integrity is like really bad, like it's single limb, best of 3 or something. But for the most part, the prelims and such, the format is well enough established that that's not the case. Which brings me to the third point, which is that when the public sees all of this complaining and they see all this, oh, RNG, or oh, the game's a joke, or what have you, there's a thing where the public gets a skewed image of results. I've talked about this before in reference to Magic the Gathering. If someone top 8's a GP, you know exactly what that means. Anyone who plays the game relatively competitively can tell you what that means in terms of play skill, what that means for that person's career, what that means for their legacy, etc. But you have such a skewed perception. I talk to people outside of Hearthstone, like other professional gamers, since I've been traveling a lot lately, and they'd be like, well, where do you stack up compared to Trump or Crip or like these big streamers? And I'm like, well, actually, these guys don't even really play competitively anymore. And they're like, what? I didn't know that. I don't know how you like rate people. I can barely tell who's good at the game. And just the public in general, if you go on Reddit, I've seen after the prelims, a lot of people were talking about how the players in these small qualifiers tend to be a lot worse. Now, I don't care if the players who qualified are worse or something like that, but the fact that the public thinks it's a small qualifier is a problem, right? Like, Blizzard hasn't done their job in advertising it as such, or the streams they watch, people take away from the event or what have you, or like they don't think it's a big qualifier because they don't see like RANT or like Strife Crow with these people. And the fact that it's not like getting across to the public just how important prelims are just shows like how far we've gotten from reality. It's insane, like how far public perception is from the actual reality. And a lot of that is in tone because of this and other things, obviously, but this especially, which is the beneficial bitching part. The game's all RNG, this format's trash, this is why I'm not in the tournament. It's just, honestly, it's nuts. Like, I just don't understand how, as like a culture or a community, we've really failed to like establish some sort of standard for what a good tournament is, or what we should expect to see from a tournament that's focused only on competitive play, and how we've been able to reinforce reasons for people not to be performing outside of just they aren't good or they got unlucky this time and it's fine. Moving on to and another thing is, like, in that same tone, to finish off that thought, it's not bad if you were good and you're not good anymore. Like, it's not a problem. Like, if you're Strife Crow and before you were one of the best players and all of a sudden now you aren't necessarily like a force to be reckoned with, that's fine. You've been streaming more often. You've been concentrating less on the game competitively. Like, it's not a big deal that your skill isn't as high as it used to be, because people know that you have the potential to get back to that skill level. It's not like something that just doesn't exist anymore. It's something that's like a continuum, and it goes up and down based on how much you're practicing or how well you understand the meta. Some people are better at different metas than other metas, and it's fine for that to be the case. It's just not okay when people complain when that is the case about factors that might not influence it at all, because it takes away from tournament integrity and the integrity of results, etc. So now the next point is Conquest or Last Hero Standing. Obviously, you guys have heard a bunch of bitching about whether Conquest is bad or Last Hero Standing is better. And I just want to open up by saying, if you ask pros who have been around for 2 years or more, they're going to tell you Last Hero Standing is the shit. It's the best format, hands down. It's not even close. Conquest is garbage. If you talk to people who've been doing well within the last year, usually a lot of them don't mind Conquest. They actually like Conquest. And this like idea that because more popular professionals are older, they have more followers, and then they complain about Conquest. So obviously, when you have this conversation, Conquest versus Last Hero Standing, the Conquest side's always going to start at a disadvantage in arguing it, because you've heard so much about how bad it is through social media, what have you. And one of the main problems that people don't like with Conquest is, this is one of the main complaints you see, is that matchups are too polarized to be for Conquest to be good, essentially. Which, considering Last Hero Standing is a format of countering, where I lead one good deck, you lead a good deck, and then we counter, and then we counter, and then we counter, and we counter. In theory, this is how it would play out. It doesn't always play out like that. But you would build a lineup that somewhat accomplishes this. In Conquest, I brought Rogue for the prelims. I didn't want to bring Rogue. I really tried hard not to bring Rogue. And a lot of people just advised me, Rogue would pick up a win in 3 games. Rogue isn't the reason I lost in the prelims, but I do wish I hadn't brought it to my lineup and brought in a different deck in general. Or, an example of this is somebody who brought Freeze Mage and Rogue. Those are 2 decks that could both be targeted by the aggro lineups that people were bringing. You just build a Conquest lineup that doesn't have Rogue in it. Like, if a deck has polarizing matchups, like let's drop Rogue as an example, because people are gonna say, oh, well, Rogue went undefeated for me, whatever. Rogue's a good deck. I think it might be the best deck in the game for ladder, whatever. I don't think that's true, but regardless, it was targeted. So look at N'Zoth Paladin. N'Zoth Paladin is a deck that could be targeted in Conquest easily. We've all seen it in the last month. If you brought N'Zoth Paladin in your lineup in NA, does that mean you're not going to get through? No. Does that mean that you're going to run into people whose 4 decks target you a higher percentage of the time, and because N'Zoth Paladin has more polarized matchups in the meta currently, that you stand a chance to just lose? Yes. But you know that going in, and that's part of building a good lineup. Just because you can't bring the decks you want in Conquest because they can be targeted and you know they're good decks, and you could bring them in Last Hero Standing, doesn't mean that Conquest is a worse format. And to claim that Last Hero Standing has more prep than Conquest, I just don't see where you could be coming from. Like Last Hero Standing right now, I think you would play Rogue, N'Zoth Paladin, Reno or Zoo, and like a 4th deck or whatever. And I don't think it's particularly hard. I mean, I just threw out an example right there, and people say, oh, well, Last Hero Standing has more macro strategy, but not bringing a deck that that can be targeted in Conquest and bringing a lineup that still has a high overall match win percentage against the field isn't easy to figure out. And sometimes it feels like so tricky or whatever that you just disallow and bring like 4 good decks. But there's definitely players who have shown that in Conquest you can be consistent, and they bring specific lineups to do so. And there's another argument that also with Conquest you'll see more like deck building, in my opinion, deck building opportunities where, for instance, Zoo deck. People play Doomguard, some people play Leroy, whatever. If you are playing in Conquest and you want to beat Rogue or beat like a certain type of deck, you can build your Zoo deck with the double Soulfire and the Leroy, and that's good and it's fine. And you get like an extra 2% versus Rogue or something. It's not that high. I think it's like 1, probably more like 1. Yeah, 1 to 2 is fine. And you get like 2% or whatever to against Rogue, and all of a sudden, like all of your decks, you make card choices that get you the extra 2% versus Rogue, and then you increase your overall match percentage. You know, someone has Rogue, you think most people are going to bring Rogue. Like you built a solid lineup, and the actual deck construction itself, the card choices were important. Last Hero Standing, I think, has a lot of strategy too. The main point I'm trying to make is I think they're both fine, and I think that rather than argue which one's better, I would just want to see one of them get standardized as the go-to for tournaments. I don't want to play some Conquest, some Last Hero Standing. Multiple formats isn't great to me. I think that having standards better. I play people in Conquest who thought they were playing Last Hero Standing. I play people Last Hero Standing thought they were playing Conquest. They're both fine. I'm going to play in whichever one they give me. And I think that they're both good enough to determine skill, but they are vastly different. And I can see how some people like one compared to the other in preference. But skill-wise, I think they're both fine. And they're both well above wherever the skill barrier is, or skill floor, so to speak. I wouldn't mind if they came up with a new format or switch formats in between, like, I don't know, seasons or years or whatever. I think that's all fine. I just want it consistent throughout a season. What I could expect from the tournaments. I want the Community Cups to all be the same. That type of thing. All right, moving on to Swiss Standard. I do think that I'd like to see Swiss become the standard for these tournaments, but and a lot of people are always complaining about the fact that it's double limb. That means you got to play a million extra rounds or what have you. You could do like a Swiss, like BlizzCon 2014 was a Swiss where once you have more than 2 losses, you're eliminated. You could do that if you wanted to. But is it that much better that you don't have to win the rounds or whatever? Like logistically, Swiss is extremely hard to run for Blizzard because they have so many different locations, and you have to wait till every game is done to make the next game. So overall, it'll result in like a time extension of like how long the tournament takes, and there's more downtime in between games on camera, which is huge since, believe it or not, Hearthstone is a huge spectator sport, or spectator game, whatever you want to call it. And without the viewers, then they wouldn't be able to support the competitive scene as much as they do. So the viewers are important, and the storyline that they're getting is important, and their entertainment's important. You could tape 2 games, do all this other random stuff, but ultimately, when it comes down to it, double limb compared to Swiss, involves just winning more games in the context of the prelims. Now, if we look at a tournament like DreamHack Summer or DreamHack Austin or DreamHack Summer, any of the DreamHacks that are on the Grand Prix, they have all their bring your own laptop or whatever. You sit down for your opponent and they're all Swiss, which works because you're all in the same place. They have the double matches, like they did great at Austin. They have the double matches on stage. They don't have to worry about nearly as much logistically as Blizzard would with the Swiss. Anybody who's been to a card tournament in person knows Swiss rounds can last forever. There's one person playing, everyone else is waiting for them. People get tired. This time, this specific prelim, there was way too much downtime in between rounds. I mean, I didn't play a game for an hour, and then I had to wait another hour just to play another game. So it might as well have just been Swiss, honestly, in terms of time. So if Blizzard doesn't get the double limp down to being as crispy as it needs to be, it might as well be Swiss. I'd like to see it become Swiss, but I understand, and I want other people to understand that there's a lot of logistics that go into Swiss. And while Swiss is better, it's not always going to be easy. Now, on the topic of logistics, I want to move on to venue consistency. This is something that I've seen people complain about. Also, for Swiss, if you wanted prelims to be better than 2 losses, if you get 2 losses, you don't get eliminated, or if you get 2 losses, you're already eliminated, then you'd have to have a larger number of rounds. It's 120 people, so you have to have, they need to go 7 and 2s need to make it, so you need 9 rounds. And you only have to win 7 rounds as it is now, I believe, to make the top 8. So you have to increase the number of rounds that are played, not that you have to win, necessarily. Which means that they'd probably have to move to including it on Friday, which is a whole other day that they need to find well, they don't necessarily have to find volunteers. They could employ people, but that's not Blizzard's MO. Not volunteers, so to speak, but people that will host it. Obviously the people get some sort of compensation or what have you. But you have to have an extra day. Anyways, on to venue consistency. 1 second. Onto venue consistency. People were complaining about venues, and then I seen a post on Twitter that said, could you imagine if NBA or NFL players complained about the conditions they were playing in? That's a terrible argument, because NBA players and NFL players that play each other are playing in the same arena. When it comes to the prelims, I could be playing in an environment that's totally conducive of good play. It could be silent. I could be sitting with my laptop. They could be bringing me water, taking care of my needs, whatever, what have you. Meanwhile, Blackout could be sitting in a bar getting hit by a foosball. And if I was also getting hit by a foosball, that'd be a fine argument. But since I'm not, since I'm getting water hand-fed to me, that's not the case. I don't mind if it's going to be in this bar area, but if you rent the top of the bar out or something, and you go there, or you get pictures and you see that set, it's this bar can support 25 players, and they can set their computers up in this manner, and no one else is going to be allowed in the bar because we rented it out, then it'd be fine. But why would you rent out a bar at that point? And is it even beneficial to do that? Monetarily, is it even the correct move? You could probably just rent out a room or something. So I just want to see venue consistency across the board, regardless of what the conditions are. Although I'd like the conditions to be conducive of good play. A couple possible options would be also to have one location, but that's not easy for everyone to travel to, so I do think that multiple locations is the best way to do it. So maybe just a little bit more effort on Blizzard's part to I don't know, I don't know how you want to say, background check the locations or make sure the locations are fine, or rent out the locations so that other people aren't there, like, just drinking and playing foosball. And then I want to talk about the admin calls and this whole thing with the prelims about the rules. First off, I want to say that it's ridiculous that we don't have a rule book for prelims. Like, the fact that I can't go to a document that's online that says everything I can and can't do is ridiculous. It's not very hard for Blizzard to do that. They can employ one person, and he or she has to work for, like, I don't know how many days, not that many, and then they come up with a rule set. And then they would distribute that to the players, and the players would know ahead of time what they are allowed and not allowed to do. There was a rules thing that they gave, but it wasn't very in-depth, and it doesn't cover all the possible scenarios. Like, for instance, if I pick the wrong class and play out an entire game, and then afterwards I find out I'm playing the wrong class because it was banned, what happens to me? That's not in the rules. That should be in the rules. This type of thing should always be covered in the rules. And that's on Blizzard. That's not on the admins, which is my next point I want to make. Most of the admins, most of the admins to all of the admins aren't making, like, personal calls when you complain. Like, oh, this happened, my opponent DC'd, and I have lethal because he's out of cards. It is deck. Like, anybody who plays Hearthstone can see I'm going to win this game every time, whatever. The rules literally say, if there's not clear lethal in the next turn, then it's a regame. There's no room, there's no gray area for personal decisions by admins. Like, they're supposed to follow it by the book, and they're supposed to dole out the ruling as such. And if a ruling isn't already known by them, like it isn't something they've been told what to do, then they're probably still not going to make the decision on their own, since they're basically contractors of Blizzard. They're going to contact people to get a hold of Blizzard so that Blizzard can make the decision. The admins don't get much for doing this, and they're helping the community. So to give them a hard time when they're basically being scapegoated, so to speak, by Blizzard isn't correct. And there's a lot of that on Twitter. Which brings me to my next topic, which is Blizzard. Blizzard has done this for a long time. This thing where they get to get a third party to do something, and they get to scapegoat them when something goes wrong. The first example, the extreme example, if anyone remembers, from early 2015, I believe, was the Good Gaming Open. It was the first tournament that they advertised in client, and by most people's standards, it went terribly. They didn't take any responsibility for it. And there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff happening where they wanted them to play a certain format the website wanted to play a format, and then Blizzard told them, oh, no, we want you to do this later on, and they barely had time to switch it, stuff like this. And Blizzard doesn't get any of the blame for this. When you see something go wrong in a community cup, you see a Reddit post that says, admin Bob totally fucked me over in this community cup, and this is ridiculous, and he should not be allowed to run community cups. Occasionally you see people be like, oh, well, this is why Blizzard should have an in-game tournament system, which is like the lightest complaint, or like the lightest like ridicule of all time. Like, Blizzard should just be getting slammed for this kind of thing. Like, it's so fucking bad. It's so bad. They get to they have no responsibility. Here's a list of community cups to play in. Here they are. Go play in them. Oh, something went wrong? We don't comment on it. We don't fucking do anything about it. There's no, transparency to even if they're looking into it or whatever. And all of it falls on the organizer, who a lot of the time has stuff happen to his tournament that's out of his control. If you take, for instance, I think I might have talked about this in the first rant. The winter season, Blizzard would just forget to put tournaments that they approved onto the list. And then when that happened, that tournament just no longer gave points. They'd come, I'd say, Blizzard, I want to run a tournament. They'd be like, you go run your tournament. You've been approved for points for 2 months, and then they update it like every 2 weeks, and then one time they forget my tournament on the list. And then all of a sudden, they don't tell me, but my tournament doesn't give points. And then when I go to tell them, they're like, oh, your tournament wasn't on the list because we made a clerical error. This is just an example of them scapegoating responsibility all the time. And the solution necessarily isn't even an in-game client. It's just more... I don't want to say, like, aggressive tournament organizing by Blizzard, but just like a more proactive approach to the community cups. You can have the third party running the community cups, but if that's the case, then as Blizzard, you should be providing them with ample resources and doing checks into how the tournaments ran, etc. I think that they have a few of these in place, but whatever they're doing is definitely not good enough. And if they're not going to run them themselves, then they should at least look into them and accept some blame when stuff goes wrong. Alright. That brings me to a couple other complaints I have about Blizzard, which is the fact that the point system for the HCT is set up so, I don't know, awkwardly. Amnesia gets qualified for BlizzCon, and then he gets automatically in the top 8 for the next season and gets his flight paid for to go to a location. And most of the time, for someone like that, like, I think he lives in... His location was pretty close to him this time. I think it was in Connecticut or something. But, like, they didn't have to do it. They didn't have to send him. So they just, like... Didn't even matter they topped 8. It was just free for them. Like, those don't roll down. No one even knows about what the travel this time. Like, it was a pretty big deal the first time around, but this time, like, I don't know. It's just... It doesn't make sense to qualify the next person automatically in. Another thing that Blizzard is definitely failing to do is build storylines throughout the year. I was going to cover this later in the Amnesia section, but I think I'll cover this now. If a player is qualified for BlizzCon already, like Amnesia, Nyman, etc., they should be trying to build that player's profile or their hype throughout the year, so that when you go to watch BlizzCon, you already know what they're about. You know what they're a fan. Like, you've seen them since you've seen them in the other tournament, and you know what they're about, and you're excited to watch them play. One way that I'd like to see them do this is by having something similar to the Magic World Cup, which would be like a Hearthstone World Cup. For instance, it'd be like a tournament that takes place, let's say, in a month from now. And you have 4-person or 5-person teams. Or you could do 3-person teams. And you have a qualifier where one person can qualify onto the team. And then you do the 2 people that qualify for BlizzCon from that area. Like, it could even be like a bigger area, like Europe versus America versus like a region showdown, or it could be even like country based. I'd like for it to be country based, but the structure I'm about to propose is regional based. And then we get to see these players play in a tournament on a team where you would do like, I don't know, we all play each other best of 5, and then whatever team has 2 people wins the round or whatever, which would help build their storylines. It would give us another tournament to get excited for, because the Hearthstone Championship Tour is the only tournament to get excited for that Blizzard's running isn't good enough in my opinion. We have other tournaments obviously being ran by tons of different organizers like DreamHack, etc. But I think Blizzard needs to find a way, if they don't get involved in community cups, to have more tournament options. Okay. And now I'm going to talk the prelim results. In my last rant, I covered the prelim results when they happened, and people were complaining about, the winners, or like if the skill level was too low for the prelims or what have you. There are a lot of random players, etc. Starting with EU prelims, we had a good swath of players come out of there that are known to be good, or most players find as an acceptable skill level to be competing in the top 8. I'm happy to see Crane make it specifically, and George C. out of that group. We also have people like Casey, who a lot of pros say is good. ultimately, we also have AKA Wonder qualifying with the Cthulhu decks. Another tournament finish for him. And like I said in my last round rant, this is basically where we're starting to build like this history and this rapport where we see all these prelim results and we see players doing well consistently. We see players qualifying again and again. In America, now someone almost qualified twice, which would have been insane. Obviously, he came in 9th last time, and then he made it in, but he could do that again. Who knows? And if Oskaka replaces someone in this top 8, then it'd be even more stacked than it is. But basically, and then the NA results were a little bit more unknown players. But regardless of the results, after the EU prelims, people were like, Standard fixed everything. Like, look, good players are qualifying again, etc., etc. And then the NA prelims come and, like, there's, like, a decent amount of new blood, so to speak. I don't think that Standard fixed all of our problems. I think that getting rid of some of the other cards that were in the game definitely solved some of our problems, and maybe Standard's a good step in solving, like, I guess, that problem. But I don't think there's ever been a point, personally, in Hearthstone where it was that bad. Even the Secret Paladin format, there was a lot of people who were consistent throughout that, even with the decks that have a low skill ceiling, or a low skill floor, my bad. And some of them had a low skill ceiling, but that's not the point. So I think that this is about what we're going to come to expect from prelims, is tournaments where, or a top 8 where the competitors are about this average skill level, and I think that that's fine. And it's not going to change for Standard versus what it used to be. There might be a more skillful meta in the future where it's only good players, so to speak, or whatever, make top 8. But I'm very content with, like, the results from the last 2 weekends. Which brings me into the deck list in the meta talk, which I want to address. Going into NA prelims, I figured that NA would be more aggro-based than the EU scene, which ended up being the case. And that led to a lot of the decisions I made in making my decks. But I think that it's interesting to look at what Standard did do for the game, which I think is a good thing, and that you'll see, like I talked about earlier in Conquest, which is card choices making a decent difference. I can design my deck, my Zoo deck, like I said, to beat Rogue. I can do the Leroy with the 2 Soulfires. I like this because and this is why, one of the reasons why I don't mind Conquest, is that the card choices, I feel like, are a little bit more important. In Last Hero Standing, you would probably want to play more of like a rounded deck. So for instance, on Twitter, Modern Leper said, people are finally learning that Doom Guards are just the right move in Zoo. If he was playing a Last Hero Standing tournament, that might be the case, or if he's playing on ladder, that might be the case. It depends on the meta, of course, but like oftentimes, more often than not, that might be the case. But if you were trying to beat specific decks, like you were this weekend, like Rogue, for instance, even though Doomguard's good against Rogue, the double Soulfire Leroy version is definitely better. And this card isn't strictly better than another card. A similar vein would be if let's say you were playing a Zoth decks and you happen to see a lot of Druid or mid-range decks, then Corrupted Healbot gets like significantly better. I'm not saying I'd play it in my Zoth Paladin, but we're starting to see, because of Standard and the way that they're developing the cards, that there's more flexibility in what your deck list can look like. And I think Conquest brings that out more than Last Hero Standing does. Which, as an example, like to touch on Zoo real quick, because that's one of the decks I'm more well versed on, I guess. Okay, so you have your Zoo deck, We're just gonna get this shell real quick. Probably should have had this made, huh? I'll take questions right now. Can chat have any questions while I make this deck? I have a cat. She likes to whine. These are facts. Let's see here. I think I played a crazy. I think I'm missing something because I got distracted. But we'll find out here in a second, huh? Yeah, this is a good example. And then let's look at this list, for instance, first, which is one of the popular lists that was played. Okay. How destroyed is my seat cushion? My chair is garbage, and I do need a new chair, but maybe I'll get like one of those professional chairs eventually in my life. Do you think Hearthstone has too low of a skill ceiling due to RNG since there isn't consistent land winners? You would think the best players would win consistently, but it doesn't seem to be the case. It's funny because only Hearthstone players think our game is full of like RNG and it's just like so terrible. Like we have results that are just as consistent percentage-wise, if not a little bit more consistent than Magic tournaments. And if you watch like the little poker versus Hearthstone thing, a lot of the poker players were saying that Hearthstone has more skill. So like, I'm not saying that this is like necessarily the case or whatever, but it's just like the RNG in Hearthstone is nowhere near as bad as it's described to be. Like nowhere near. Like nowhere ever fucking near as bad as people think it is. And that's because of the way our culture has evolved and the way that it's displayed on like social media, for instance. And like the first topic, beneficial bitching, occurs all the time. I got knocked out. Why did I get knocked out? Did I play bad? No, I played well. Could it just be that's a card game? Nope. That thought just gets skipped. Most of the time it's just like, format was shit. Okay. Let's look at this deck list, for instance. I'm not saying you play Crazy Alchemist. This is just a quick thing that I want to cover. That I think matters in like the meta. So let's say like I decided that I wanted to run Leroy over Doomguard, and this is what I want to run, and I want to run one Sea Giant and one Soulfire. This is pretty close to like Chalky's list. I think that he played in his tournament, like Nassim and Muzzy and stuff. Anyways, so let's say like, oh, Dark Iron Dwarf, I don't want that card, I want Gormak. So I would say this list is built. Personally, I would say that like this list is built wrong. Like people are really going between Gormak and Dark Iron. So like let's say that they're close. These cards are obviously close, and how good they are. So you're looking at this deck list. You know this deck list is fine. And I played one that was similar. It was dropped Sea Giant for a second Soulfire, but this is a big change, right? So when you drop the Sea Giant for a second Soulfire, all of a sudden you have one less card that requires you to have a big board, or one less card that's going to be sitting in your hand because you're not running the Sea Giant, so you can maybe afford to run the Gormak. Like if Gormak and Dark Iron are close, then you'd rather err on the side of which one, like don't like double down on your weaknesses, I guess, so to speak, and like Zoo, for instance, because it's about consistency since they're close. So I'd rather see like this list with the Dark Iron than I would with the Gormak. And like by the same token, if you take out the Soulfire and you run Doom Guards or whatever, like if you play Doom Guards, you probably don't want to play Gormak, like just like this type of thing. And a lot of these card choices I think are like more important, and you think about them more when you're building your lineup to beat a single deck, which is only something you usually do in Conquest. You could also do it in Last Hero Standing, but it's not as popular. Yeah. I think that both Zoo lists were acceptable this weekend. I personally played the Leroy list. I would have also played the Leroy list. There's some other examples of this. Like if you look at a Paladin deck, this is the list I'm running right now. I prefer at least to Justicar because I think they both win control matchups. This is like a moot point, though, in this discussion. I'm playing Corrupted Healbot in this list because I was playing against a lot of mid-range decks like Temple Warrior and stuff where this card's good against those. And ultimately, like, it's pretty comparable to the card that was in its place. Not Kodo. Kodo was in there too. And then the Humility in the Kodo is also good versus like mid-range. So if you build your 4 decks and you want to beat mid-range, you can like switch with some of those cards before. And people are going to argue probably, eventually, once people figure out what decks are good, or like what the best list is, it'll be all flushed out and all the decks will be similar, and that's the argument with behind like all the Zoo decks will have Doomguard. But I don't think that'll be the case this time around, and I think it's because Standard's a little bit different, and there aren't as many obviously good cards that are way above their power level. Like when you take out Paladin Shredder, the 4-drop spot becomes more open to like what you're trying to beat, etc. Where Paladin Shredder just beat everything, so I ran Paladin Shredder. So I think that Standard's done a good job in accomplishing that. Moving forward, I think that we saw a lot of aggro decks at the NA, whether they did good or not. We saw control decks at the EU. The format for the championships is best of 7, which is a little bit different. I think that you're going to see Zoo to continue doing well. Mid-range Shaman, Rogue, N'Zoth Paladin, like I don't think you'll see anything new. And I think that you'll, except for Dragon Warrior, that deck's sick. It has 75% win percentage in the prelims. It got banned for me twice. I think I won the other game. I'm not sure. That deck's just good. If you haven't tried Dragon Warrior, this is a shameless plug for it right here. Go try Dragon Warrior. As mid-range decks get better, maybe you see less control decks that are like really high on the spectrum that lose a charge and stuff like that, but I don't think that you'll see a lot of consistent lists throughout this season. Like I don't think you'll see lists that are just this is the best list and this is the one we're going to play forever. And some of the decks that have choices. And Shaman, mid-range Shaman, for instance, is a deck that would just have a consistent list. But even then, you could take out the Bloodlust and you can make it better. And these are the kind of percentages that you need to find that you don't find while playing on the ladder, that you can find while building a Conquest lineup if you practice enough. And I had another thought here. It wasn't on Dragon Warrior, but that deck is good. It was, I don't remember. Maybe I'll remember. On to Amnesia competing. This is less about Amnesia competing specifically and more about the idea that someone who's already qualified for BlizzCon can compete in another qualifier. I realize there's also a point system that qualified them, and I realize there's money on the line, not just an invite. But I believe it stands to reason that the person who's already qualified for BlizzCon probably shouldn't be able to compete in the qualifier tournament for BlizzCon. Money aside, that person is way more incentivized to do something that's against the tournament integrity. Not saying what Amnesia did was against the tournament integrity by dropping out. It's just that decision's a lot easier to make when you're already qualified for BlizzCon. Or the decision to maybe throw a win to get somebody else in top 8 than me when I'm already qualified for BlizzCon is a lot easier. Does that suck for them that they can't play in the tournament? Yes, absolutely. Blizzard should give them more opportunities. Basically. It's definitely within Amnesia's right to drop out of the tournament. I'm not trying to talk about that drama. It does suck to his opponents that he beat them then dropped out, but it also sucks to his opponents that he beat them in general, is I guess what I'm trying to say, since he already has a spot that's qualified, and that's the main point of the tournament, not the money. So going forward, I'd like to see players who are already qualified for BlizzCon not being able to compete in the future prelims. Yeah. Moving on to the interviews. Everyone obviously knows or seen that people talked about Napoleon's interview. I personally didn't think that Napoleon's interview was that bad. Furthermore, it's my understanding that A, the caster can see the player while he's interviewing them, B, they ask the player if he wants to give an interview. And C, the whole process is garbage. The player is playing. He gets done playing. They say, do you want to do an interview? He says yes. He doesn't even get up from the chair. All they have to do when they switch back to the analyst desk is give the person some time, or maybe just have like a list of things that the admin has to do or can do or whatever to make sure the person's comfortable, make sure that they understand the questions they're about to be asking, this type of thing. Which isn't something that Blizzard has done notoriously well. For instance, at the last prelims, after Amnesia won, they were like, here's Amnesia. How you feel? You feel great. Yeah, I won. I'm so happy. Here's my people I helped. And it's like, bye. And then everyone's like waving and like just fucking pans out. I'm like, what was this? Like, they need to have the person win, present them with the award. It's very simple. It's a very simple process. They do it in League of Legends too, and they've always done it in Magic like this. Person wins. You present them the award. Then you cut to the analyst desk for an extended amount of time. You have the person who won and Frodan or somebody go sit aside on a table, and you get ready to do an interview after the person has calmed down a bit and after the moment is like more set in stone or whatever what have you. And then you after the analyst desk go to the interview. It gives people a reason to stay around after the thing's over. It gives them a good time for the analyst to like go over the game, or go over the whole tournament, which is good because it builds more storylines than just like Amnesia's storyline or whatever. And then you also get to interview the player afterwards in a more calm environment where they give better answers and you can ask better questions and you can entertain the viewers more, and then you leave them with a better image than just, hey, okay, bye, like throw stuff in the air. So I'd definitely like to see the interview process that they have get improved on drastically. If the ending ceremony for the prelims does not get improved upon from last time, that's just pathetic in my opinion, because the ending ceremony last time was horrible. Like, it was straight garbage. Bonus topic. iPhone games on phones, it says. It's supposed to say on planes. If you want to play Clash Royale on your iPhone, though, I suggest it. It's a good game. But I was supposed to say iPhone games on planes. And if I see another fucking person sit down next to me and play Bejeweled for 2.5 hours, or, you know what's even worse? I had this, they were playing Candy Crush with the volume on all the way. I was trying to sleep. It was like, scrumptious. It was fucking terrible. Like, please find better stuff to do on your flights than play Bejeweled or fucking Candy Crush. Like, I will recommend you, send me a message, I will recommend you audiobooks on any topic. Like, there are so much more constructive stuff you could be doing with your fucking time than playing Candy Crush. And you better not be playing it with the fucking volume on, because other people are going to lose sleep over it. And I'm not even on the plane, and I'm still losing sleep over it. That's it for the Rat Rant, episode 2.